Hi guys, today we are going to tell you this history that refuses to die, a story whispered across ancient stone tablets, modern conspiracy forums, and late-night documentaries alike. The story of whether the Anunnaki came from a mysterious planet called Nibiru. This is not just a question about ancient gods. It is a question about who we are, where we come from, and whether human history is far older and stranger than we have been told. For thousands of years, the earliest civilizations on Earth looked up at the sky and saw something more than stars. They saw power, they saw order, they saw beings who ruled both heaven and earth, and among those beings one name echoes louder than almost any other, the Anunnaki. But were they gods, were they symbols, or were they visitors from a lost world moving through the darkness of space? Tonight we begin at the very beginning, before aliens, before rogue planets, before modern theories, back when human civilization itself was just being born. Long before pyramids rose from desert sands, long before empires carved their borders into the earth, there was Sumer. Sumer was not just another ancient culture. It was the first civilization to leave behind a written record of its thoughts, its fears, and its gods. Around 5,000 years ago, in the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the Sumerians built cities, established laws, tracked the movements of the stars, and most importantly for our story, wrote down their myths. They pressed symbols into wet clay using reeds, creating what we now call cuneiform tablets. These tablets were not written for us. They were written for priests, kings, and gods, and yet, thousands of years later, they speak directly to us. On these tablets, we find repeated references to a group of powerful beings called the Anunnaki. The name itself roughly translates to those who came from heaven to earth. And that single phrase has fueled decades of speculation, because if they came from heaven, what exactly did that mean? To the ancient Sumerians, heaven did not mean outer space as we imagine it today. It meant the divine realm, the sky, the place of the gods, the unseen order behind reality. The Anunnaki were described as the children of the sky god Anu, beings who held authority over destiny, kingship, and the structure of the cosmos itself. They were not background characters, they were central figures. They decided who ruled, they enforced cosmic law, they shaped the world as humans knew it. But here is where things become interesting. Unlike many later mythologies, the Sumerian gods were not distant or abstract, they were present. They walked among humans, they argued, they disagreed. They made mistakes, they punished, they rewarded, and this has led some to ask a dangerous question. What if these were not gods at all, but beings misunderstood as gods? This is where the idea of Nibiru enters the story. The word Nibiru appears in ancient Mesopotamian texts, but not in the way modern theories describe it. In the original language, Nibiru roughly means crossing point or place of passage. It is associated with movement, transition, and celestial order. In some texts, Nibiru is linked to Jupiter. In others, it is associated with a star. In still others, it represents a symbolic point in the sky where cosmic forces intersect. It is not described as a planet in the modern sense. It is not described as a home world, and it is never described as a place from which the Anunnaki physically traveled. So how did Nibiru transform from a symbolic celestial term into a rogue planet carrying alien gods? The answer lies not in ancient Sumer, but in the 20th century. In the 1970s, a man named Zecharia Sitchin introduced a radical reinterpretation of Mesopotamian texts. According to his claims, the Anunnaki were not gods but extraterrestrials. Nibiru, he argued, was a physical planet with a long, elliptical orbit that brought it into our solar system every 3,600 years. According to this theory, the Anunnaki came to Earth in the distant past to mine resources, particularly gold. Humans in this version of history were genetically engineered as a labor force. Civilization itself was not invented by humans, but handed down by these visitors. It was a stunning idea, a shocking idea, and one that captured the imagination of millions. But stunning ideas demand extraordinary evidence, and this is where the story begins to fracture. Professional linguists and Assyriologists, experts who have spent their lives studying cuneiform, have repeatedly stated that Sitchin's translations do not match the original texts. Words are redefined, context is ignored, symbolism is taken literally. In other words, the ancient tablets do not say what the modern theory claims they say, and yet the theory persists. Why? Because it taps into something deeper than facts alone. Humans have always suspected that something is missing from our story. We see ancient structures that seem impossibly precise. We see mythologies across the world that speak of sky beings and golden ages. We see sudden leaps in civilization that feel almost too fast, and when traditional explanations feel unsatisfying, alternative stories rush in to fill the void. The Anunnaki Nibiru theory offers a grand narrative. It offers purpose. It offers a hidden truth behind history itself. But here is where we must slow down, because ancient myths are not instruction manuals. They are symbolic maps of reality as ancient people understood it. The gods represented forces, nature, authority, chaos, order, time. To mistake metaphor for machinery is to misunderstand how ancient cultures thought. The Anunnaki did not need spaceships to descend from heaven. They descended through ritual, belief, and cosmic symbolism, and Nibiru did not need to be a planet. It was a marker, a concept, an idea that helped ancient astronomers and priests understand the heavens. Still, questions remain. Why were the Anunnaki described as so powerful? Why did later cultures echo similar sky god narratives? Why do modern people feel such a strong pull toward this story? Because even if the Anunnaki were not extraterrestrials, they were something just as powerful. They were humanity's first attempt to understand its place in the universe. To understand why the idea of Nibiru and the Anunnaki feels so convincing to the modern mind, we must now step directly into the ancient world itself, not through speculation, not through modern theories, but through the actual way ancient people understood the sky. Because the truth is this: the ancients were not ignorant. They were not primitive stargazers guessing blindly at the heavens. They were precise observers. They tracked cycles that modern astronomers still respect today. And nowhere was this more true than in ancient Mesopotamia. The Sumerians and later the Akkadians and Babylonians did not separate astronomy from religion. To them, the sky was not empty space. It was alive, it was structured, it was governed by order. Every movement above had meaning below. The stars were not just stars, they were signs, messages, markers of divine will. And within this celestial system, certain bodies mattered more than others: the sun, the moon, and 5 visible planets. Each one was associated with a god. Jupiter, the largest and brightest, was linked to supreme authority. Venus represented love, war, and transformation. Mars symbolized chaos and destruction. Mercury carried messages between realms. Saturn marked boundaries, time, and limitation. This is crucial, because when ancient texts speak of gods moving through the heavens, they are often describing planetary motion, not physical beings traveling in spacecraft. The gods were written into the sky. Now let us return to Nibiru. When ancient astronomical texts mention Nibiru, they do not do so casually. The word appears in contexts describing alignment, crossing, and cosmic order. It is not a place where gods live. It is a role something plays. Nibiru is the point that restores balance. In some traditions, when Jupiter reaches a certain position in the sky, crossing a celestial boundary, it is called Nibiru. Not because Jupiter becomes something else, but because it fulfills a specific function at that moment. This is how ancient language works. A single object can have multiple names depending on what it is doing. This is where modern interpretations go wrong. They assume names equal objects, but in ancient thought, names often described actions. Nibiru is not a planet hiding beyond Pluto. Nibiru is that which crosses, and crossing points matter deeply in ancient cosmology. Crossings represent transitions, endings and beginnings, judgment and renewal. This symbolism appears everywhere. Flood myths, creation myths, stories of divine punishment and rebirth, which brings us to one of the most important stories tied to the Anunnaki, the Great Flood. In ancient Mesopotamian texts, there is a flood story older than the biblical one. In this story, the gods decide humanity has become too loud, too chaotic, too disruptive. The divine order is threatened. One god wishes to destroy humanity. Another secretly warns a human to build a vessel. A flood comes, civilization nearly ends, and afterward order is restored. This is not science fiction. This is mythological language describing cycles of collapse and renewal, something every ancient civilization experienced firsthand. Floods destroyed cities, droughts ended empires, plagues wiped out populations. To ancient people, these were not random events, they were divine decisions. The Anunnaki were the ones who made those decisions, not because they were aliens pressing buttons, but because they represented the forces that governed existence. When later readers encounter these stories without understanding the symbolic framework, they interpret them literally. Gods become beings, heaven becomes space, crossings become planets, and suddenly mythology turns into misunderstood history. But there is another reason the Anunnaki Nibiru idea gained power. Modern humanity lives in a technological age. We think in machines, we think in hardware, we think in engineering. So when we look at ancient stories, we unconsciously translate them into modern terms. A chariot of fire becomes a spacecraft. A divine weapon becomes a laser. A god descending from heaven becomes an astronaut landing on Earth. This is not deception, it is projection. We see the past through the lens of the present. And yet there is something undeniably strange about the Anunnaki stories. They are not gentle gods, they are not distant, they are authoritative, controlling, demanding. They give laws, they assign labor, they decide who lives and who dies, they feel administrative. This is why some people insist they must have been real rulers of some kind, but here is the uncomfortable truth. Ancient kings ruled exactly the same way. Absolute authority, divine justification. No separation between religion and governance. The gods behaved like kings because kings modeled themselves after gods, or perhaps the other way around. When Sumerian rulers claimed divine descent, they were not saying, "I am half alien." They were saying, "My authority is cosmic." The Anunnaki were not aliens ruling humanity. They were the idea that authority itself comes from beyond the human world. Now let us address the claim that humans were genetically engineered. This idea often points to passages where humans are created by gods to serve them. But again, ancient language is symbolic. To create does not always mean to physically manufacture. It means to assign purpose, to define a role within cosmic order. When texts say humans were made to work for the gods, this reflects a worldview where labor was sacred, farming was holy, building temples was divine service. The gods needed humans not for survival, but for maintenance of order. Ritual kept the universe balanced, offerings kept chaos away. Work was worship. This is not alien science. This is religious cosmology. And yet one question still lingers. If Nibiru was never a planet and the Anunnaki were never extraterrestrials, why do we see modern astronomical theories like Planet 9 stir up the same fears and excitement? Because the human mind is drawn to hidden worlds, we are uncomfortable with the idea that we know everything. The thought that something massive could exist beyond our sight, influencing us from the shadows, resonates deeply. It always has. Ancient people felt it in the movements of the stars. Modern people feel it in the depths of space. Different language, same impulse. Nibiru survives not because it is real, but because it represents the unknown. And the unknown always terrifies and fascinates us at the same time. Because now we arrive at the most controversial, most visually striking, and most misunderstood part of the entire Anunnaki story, the claim that ancient texts and artifacts describe advanced technology, machines, and visitors from the stars. This is the point where curiosity turns into conviction for many people. Up to this moment, mythology can be explained, symbolism can be debated, language can be interpreted. But when people believe they see evidence carved in stone, when they believe they see helmets, flying machines, and weapons etched into ancient reliefs, the conversation changes. So let us go there carefully, slowly, honestly, because this is where the story either collapses or transforms into something much deeper than aliens. When modern viewers look at ancient art, they often feel an immediate sense of shock. Figures wearing what appear to be helmets, objects that resemble watches or handbags. Winged beings hovering above humans, gods descending from the sky surrounded by light. At first glance, these images feel technological, but ancient art was not meant to be literal. It was symbolic communication designed to convey power, authority, and divine presence, not to document physical reality the way modern photography does. In Mesopotamian reliefs, the so-called handbag carried by gods is not a piece of technology. It is a ritual bucket associated with purification ceremonies. The cone-like object in the other hand is used for sprinkling holy water. Together, they symbolize the cleansing and ordering of the world. To ancient viewers, this imagery was instantly recognizable. To modern viewers unfamiliar with the symbolism, it looks alien. This is a recurring pattern. Ancient symbols lose their meaning over time, and when meaning disappears, imagination fills the gap. Now let us examine the idea of flying machines. In ancient texts, gods are often described as traveling in chariots, clouds, or storms. Fire, wind, thunder, and light surround them. They descend from the heavens and ascend back again. To a modern mind raised on rockets and aircraft, this sounds like aerospace technology, but to an ancient mind, these descriptions were the language of power. Storms were terrifying, lightning was divine, thunder shook the earth. If a god moved, it made sense that the world trembled. This is not because ancient people witnessed spacecraft, but because natural forces were the most powerful phenomena they knew. When gods moved, nature reacted, and so nature became the vehicle. There is another reason the Anunnaki are often interpreted as advanced beings. They were associated with knowledge. They taught humans writing. They taught mathematics. They taught astronomy. They taught agriculture and law. This feels suspiciously like civilization uplift to modern audiences. But again, we must remember something critical. Every ancient culture credited its gods with the origin of knowledge. In Egypt, it was Thoth. In Greece, it was Athena and Prometheus. In Mesoamerica, it was Quetzalcoatl. In India, it was the Devas. No one argues these gods were extraterrestrials. Why? Because we do not apply the same modern expectations to every culture. The Anunnaki stand out because Sumer is older. Closer to the beginning, closer to the unknown, and the closer something is to the origin of civilization, the easier it is to imagine it was not human. Now let us address the most emotionally powerful claim of all, the claim that humans were created to serve the Anunnaki. This idea strikes a nerve because it touches on something deeply unsettling. What if we were not born free? What if our purpose was imposed? What if we were designed to obey? But ancient societies already believed this without aliens. Humans served kings, kings served gods, the entire universe was hierarchical. The Anunnaki sat at the top not because they enslaved humanity, but because hierarchy was how reality itself was understood. Order flowed downward, chaos waited below. To serve was not humiliation, it was cosmic duty. The modern mind rejects this because modern culture values individual freedom above cosmic order. Ancient culture did not. At this point, some listeners grow frustrated. They ask, if everything can be explained symbolically, then what about the details, the numbers, the precision, the astronomical knowledge? This is a fair question. Ancient Mesopotamians tracked planetary cycles with extraordinary accuracy. They predicted eclipses. They divided time into units we still use today. They understood long-term celestial patterns. This feels advanced, but advanced does not mean impossible. It means patient observation over thousands of years. When a civilization is stable, centralized, and obsessed with the heavens, knowledge accumulates. And in Mesopotamia, astronomy was not a hobby, it was survival. Floods depended on seasons, crops depended on timing, kings depended on omens. The sky was the ultimate authority, so they watched it relentlessly. What looks like secret knowledge is often just long memory. Now we arrive at the psychological heart of the Anunnaki theory. Why do people want them to be real? Because the alternative is more unsettling. If the Anunnaki were gods invented by humans, then humanity has always been alone, creating meaning in a vast, indifferent universe. If the Anunnaki were extraterrestrials, then we are part of a larger cosmic story. Watched, guided, possibly protected. One worldview is lonely, the other is comforting, even if frightening. This is why the idea refuses to die, but there is something even more important here. The Anunnaki myth is not about aliens or planets. It is about power, who has it, where it comes from, and whether humans truly control their own destiny. In ancient times, power came from the gods. In modern times, power comes from systems, governments, technology, corporations. The language has changed. The structure has not. When people say the Anunnaki rule the world, they are often expressing something else entirely. A feeling that control lies beyond ordinary people. That decisions are made somewhere above. That unseen forces shape our lives. The Anunnaki become a symbol for that fear, and now we must confront one final misunderstanding. The idea that ancient myths are either literal history or complete fiction. They are neither. Myths are compressed truth. They encode social structure, psychology, astronomy, ethics, fear, hope. They are not lies. They are not science. They are human attempts to explain existence before modern language existed. Anunnaki did not arrive in spaceships, but they did arrive in human consciousness at the moment humanity first asked, "Who is in control?" And that question has never stopped echoing. So where does this leave Nibiru? Nibiru becomes what it has always been, a crossing, a threshold, a symbolic boundary between order and chaos, known and unknown. Every civilization has one. Every era renames it. In ancient times, it was a star crossing the sky. In medieval times, it was heaven and hell. In modern times, it is hidden planets and alien watchers. Different symbols, same anxiety, because now we move from the ancient world into the modern one, into the moment where myth, psychology, fear, and technology collide, and where the Anunnaki story is reborn in an entirely new form. Up to now, we have spoken about ancient people, about how they saw the sky, about how they turned order, chaos, power, and fear into gods, but something changes dramatically in the modern era. For the first time in history, humans leave the Earth. We build machines that fly. We send probes beyond the solar system. We look back at our planet from space. And the moment that happens, the old myths begin to feel different. Suddenly, heaven is no longer a spiritual realm. It is a place you can visit. Suddenly, the sky gods feel less symbolic and more literal. And this is the moment the Anunnaki return. The 20th century is not just the age of science. It is the age of anxiety, world wars, nuclear weapons, governments operating in secrecy, technology advancing faster than ethics. People begin to sense that power no longer sits where it once did. Decisions that shape millions of lives are made behind closed doors. Weapons exist that can end civilization in minutes. Information is controlled, filtered, hidden. And into this environment, the Anunnaki narrative fits perfectly. Because it says something many already feel, that humanity is not in charge, that someone or something else is pulling the strings. This is why the Anunnaki are often linked to modern conspiracy theories. They are not really about aliens, they are about control. The idea that ancient gods never left, that they simply changed form, that they now operate through elites, bloodlines, institutions. This is not ancient belief. This is modern mistrust wearing ancient clothing. The Anunnaki become a way to explain why the world feels rigged, why suffering persists despite progress, why truth feels buried. And Nibiru, once a symbolic crossing in the sky, becomes a threat, a returning force that will reset the world. Apocalypse is always easier to imagine than reform, but let us slow down again. Because when we examine the claims carefully, patterns emerge. Modern Anunnaki narratives often cherry-pick ancient texts. They isolate dramatic passages. They ignore context, genre, and symbolism. This is not how history works. It is how storytelling works, and storytelling is powerful. The more complex the world becomes, the more we crave simple explanations. Aliens did it. They made us. They rule us. They will return. This removes responsibility. If humanity is broken, it is not our fault. If the world is unjust, it is not our doing. If power is corrupt, it comes from elsewhere. The Anunnaki become cosmic scapegoats. But there is another layer, one that is rarely discussed. The Anunnaki stories mirror something very specific in human psychology, the experience of authority. As children, power is external. Parents decide, rules exist without explanation. Punishment feels absolute. To a child, parents are godlike. As societies grow, this dynamic scales upward. Kings replace parents. Gods replace kings. Systems replace gods, but the emotional structure remains the same. Someone above, someone watching. Someone deciding. The Anunnaki feel familiar because they reflect this structure perfectly. They are powerful but flawed, protective but cruel, creators and destroyers, just like authority itself. Now consider this. Ancient people did not fear the Anunnaki in the way modern people do. They respected them, appeased them, worked within their system. Fear came from chaos, not control. Modern people fear control more than chaos. This inversion is critical. It explains why the same myth produces opposite reactions across time. To ancient people, gods provided order. To modern people, gods represent oppression. Same story, different worldview. Let us return once more to Nibiru. In modern interpretations, Nibiru is not just a planet. It is a countdown. It is always approaching, always hidden, always just beyond detection. This is not astronomy. This is apocalyptic psychology. Nibiru functions like past end times beliefs. A cleansing flood, a final judgment, a great reset. Every era imagines the end using its own symbols. Ancient people imagined floods and fire. Modern people imagine rogue planets and cosmic disasters, different language, same fear. Now ask yourself this: if Nibiru were real, if a massive planet truly entered the inner solar system every few thousand years, what would that mean? Gravitational chaos, orbital instability, mass extinctions recorded unmistakably in geology. And yet the geological record does not show periodic planetary flybys. Astronomy does not show an object of this scale hiding undetected. The universe is vast but not invisible. Large objects leave fingerprints, Nibiru leaves none. So why does belief persist? Because belief does not require evidence, it requires meaning. There is something else at work here. Modern humanity feels disconnected from nature, from purpose, from history. Ancient myths offer connection. They suggest we were once closer to the source, closer to the gods, closer to truth. The Anunnaki become symbols of a lost golden age, not because they were real, but because the longing is. People do not want aliens, they want significance. They want to matter in a universe that feels indifferent. Now let us examine a subtle but crucial point. Ancient myths rarely describe progress. They describe decline, a fall from perfection, a loss of divine presence, a world growing more corrupt over time. This pattern appears everywhere. Eden, Golden Ages, Age of Heroes. The Anunnaki myths follow the same structure. They arrive, they establish order, they withdraw. Humanity is left alone. This is not a story about aliens leaving Earth. It is a story about growing up, about losing certainty, about becoming responsible for oneself, about standing without gods. This is why the Anunnaki feel both fascinating and terrifying. They represent a return to certainty. If they come back, someone else is in charge again. Someone else decides. No more ambiguity, no more responsibility. That is the true temptation of the Anunnaki myth. Not knowledge, not technology, but surrender. And this brings us to the most uncomfortable realization of all. The Anunnaki never needed to exist physically to shape the world. Ideas shape reality. Belief shapes behavior. Power structures mirror myths. When people believe authority comes from above, they accept hierarchy. When people believe they were created to serve, they obey. When people believe control is inevitable, they stop resisting. The Anunnaki do not rule the world, but belief in them can. This is the moment when the Anunnaki are no longer discussed as ancient gods or misunderstood symbols, but as active forces operating in the present world. This is where the narrative crosses a line, and once that line is crossed, it never fully returns. In the age of the internet, stories do not simply spread. They mutate, fragments detach from their original context, images circulate without explanation. Claims repeat until repetition itself feels like proof. This is how the Anunnaki narrative changes form. What once required long books and obscure translations now fits into short videos, dramatic thumbnails, and emotionally charged headlines. The Anunnaki never left. THEY control humanity. The return of Nibiru is imminent. These statements are not meant to inform. They are meant to activate emotion, fear, anger, revelation, belonging, and emotion spreads faster than truth ever could. Modern Anunnaki narratives often claim that powerful families, secret organizations, or global institutions are descended from or controlled by these ancient beings. This idea feels compelling because it explains inequality without complexity. If the world is unfair, it is because it was designed that way. If power feels unreachable, it is because it is not human. If systems feel inescapable, it is because they are ancient. The Anunnaki become the ultimate explanation for everything that feels wrong. But here is the hidden danger. Once power is believed to be non-human, resistance feels pointless. Why fight gods? Why challenge beings older than history? Why attempt change if the system is cosmic? The myth does not empower, it paralyses. Let us pause here. Because ancient myths were never meant to do this. They were meant to explain the world, not imprison the mind. The Anunnaki were once symbols of order, forces that made reality understandable. But in modern reinterpretations, they become symbols of inevitability, and inevitability is the enemy of agency. There is another transformation that happens online. The Anunnaki become increasingly literal. Metaphor is stripped away. Psychology is ignored. Symbolism is dismissed. Every story must be factual, every god must be physical, every myth must be evidence. This reflects a deeper discomfort with ambiguity. Modern culture struggles with maybe. People want certainty. Aliens give certainty. They are concrete, material, technological. They replace mystery with machinery. But mystery is not a flaw in ancient myth, it is the point. Now let us examine one of the most common claims, that ancient texts describe advanced machines too complex for early humans to imagine. This assumes something deeply flawed, that ancient humans lacked imagination. In truth, ancient people imagined entire worlds beyond death, beings with multiple heads, cosmic battles, and cyclical time spanning millions of years. They were not limited thinkers, they were mythic thinkers. Their creativity was not bound by physical realism. A god flying through the sky was not a prediction of a jet, it was a statement of dominance. A god wielding thunder was not a description of a weapon, it was a metaphor for unstoppable force. The modern insistence on literalism flattens myth into bad science fiction. There is something else happening beneath the surface. The Anunnaki narrative offers a sense of initiation. Those who know feel awakened. Those who reject it feel asleep. This creates identity, belonging. A community bound by secret knowledge. And once belief becomes identity, evidence becomes irrelevant. Challenges feel like attacks. Skepticism feels like control. Disagreement feels hostile. This is how myths harden into ideology. Now we must confront a difficult truth. Many people do not believe in the Anunnaki because of evidence. They believe because the story feels true. It resonates emotionally. It mirrors lived experience. Power feels distant. Authority feels unaccountable. Systems feel ancient and immovable. The Anunnaki explain that feeling, but explaining a feeling does not make it fact. There is a pattern repeating here, one humanity has followed many times before. When societies experience rapid change, uncertainty, and loss of trust, myths of hidden rulers emerge. In ancient times it was gods. In medieval times, demons and angels. In modern times, aliens and secret elites. The form changes, the function does not. Now let us return one last time to the ancient world. The Anunnaki did not rule humanity in secret. They ruled openly. They were visible in ritual, law, and kingship. There were no conspiracies, no hidden hands, no shadow governments. The gods were acknowledged because order was believed to require them. Modern Anunnaki myths invert this completely. Power is hidden, truth is suppressed, knowledge is forbidden. This reflects not ancient reality, but modern distrust. And here is the most important realization of all. The Anunnaki myth survives because it answers a question modern society avoids. Who is responsible for the state of the world? Ancient people answered, the gods. Modern people answer, systems, corporations, elites. The Anunnaki narrative merges both answers into one: cosmic systems, ancient elites, unchallengeable authority. It is a perfect storm, but there is a cost. When responsibility is externalized, growth stops. When blame becomes cosmic, solutions disappear. When humans believe they were created to serve, they forget they can choose. Ancient myths were never meant to erase human agency. They were meant to contextualize it, so let us be clear. The Anunnaki did not come from Nibiru. Nibiru was never a rogue planet. There is no hidden race ruling humanity from the shadows of space. but there is a recurring human impulse to believe that power comes from beyond ourselves. And that impulse shapes history far more than any alien ever could. They become a mirror, not of the sky, not of space, but of the human mind itself. From the earliest moments of consciousness, human beings have searched for patterns. We look for causes behind events. We look for intentions behind outcomes. We look for meaning behind suffering. When lightning strikes, we ask who did it. When crops fail, we ask why we were punished. When power appears absolute, we ask where it came from. The Anunnaki emerge precisely at this intersection where uncertainty becomes unbearable. They are not answers, they are containers for questions too large to face directly. Think about the world the Sumerians lived in. Floods could erase cities overnight, droughts could starve thousands, disease could appear without warning, kings ruled by decree backed by violence. From inside that reality, randomness was terrifying, so randomness became intention, disaster became judgment, success became favor. Authority became divine. The Anunnaki were born not out of ignorance but out of necessity. They gave chaos a face. Now fast forward to the modern world. We live longer, we know more, we control nature in ways ancient people never imagined. And yet the world still feels chaotic, power still feels distant, suffering still feels unjust. Technology did not remove existential fear. It amplified it, because now we see the scale of the universe. Billions of galaxies, trillions of stars. A planet that is statistically insignificant, and suddenly the old fear returns in a new form. What if we do not matter? This is where the Anunnaki reappear. Aliens are the modern gods. They are advanced, they are knowledgeable, they are beyond us. They restore hierarchy in a universe that feels flat and meaningless. They reintroduce purpose. If we were created, then we matter. If we were guided, then we are not lost. If someone is watching, then existence is not random. The Anunnaki fulfill this role perfectly. They are ancient enough to feel authoritative, mysterious enough to feel unreachable, powerful enough to explain everything. But there is a darker side to this comfort, because if meaning comes from above, then responsibility does not come from within. If someone else designed the system, then we did not break it. If someone else rules, then resistance feels futile. This is why Anunnaki narratives often slide quietly from curiosity into fatalism. Nothing can be changed, everything is controlled, humanity is trapped. This is not ancient belief. This is modern despair. Now let us confront something uncomfortable. There is a reason Anunnaki stories rarely focus on cooperation. They focus on hierarchy, command, obedience, punishment. The Anunnaki do not liberate humanity. They manage it. This reflects a very specific psychological pattern. When people feel overwhelmed, they often long for authority, even harsh authority, because chaos feels worse. Better a cruel ruler than no ruler at all. This is why myths of powerful overseers emerge in times of uncertainty. The Anunnaki are not fantasies of freedom. They are fantasies of order. And now we must ask a difficult question. Why does the idea of humans being created to serve resonate so deeply? Because on some level, many people already feel that way. Modern life can feel like endless labor. Systems feel inescapable. Purpose feels assigned rather than chosen. The Anunnaki myth gives this feeling a cosmic backstory. It says, you were made for this. That can be horrifying or comforting, depending on how lost you feel. Ancient myths externalized these feelings. Modern psychology internalizes them, but the structure remains the same. The gods of the past become the systems of the present, invisible, powerful, unquestionable. And when systems feel too complex to understand, the mind returns to myth. Now consider this carefully. The Anunnaki myth does not actually answer questions, it postpones them. Instead of asking, how do power structures form, it says they were always there. Instead of asking, why do humans obey? It says they were created to. Instead of asking, how can we change? It says we cannot. This is why the myth feels heavy. It closes doors. Ancient myths did the opposite. They explained the world so people could live within it. Ritual gave agency. Prayer gave participation. Offerings gave negotiation. The gods were powerful, but they could be influenced. Modern Anunnaki narratives remove that possibility. There is no negotiation with cosmic overlords, only submission or annihilation. That is not ancient thinking. That is modern fear projected backward. Here is the key realization. The Anunnaki myth changes when people stop seeing themselves as authors of their future. When agency fades, overseers appear. When responsibility feels unbearable, creators emerge. When freedom feels overwhelming, rulers descend from the sky. This pattern repeats endlessly across cultures. Now let us strip the story down to its core. The Anunnaki represent externalized authority. Nibiru represents inevitable return, the idea that no matter what we do, the cycle resets. Together, they form a complete worldview. You did not choose this world. You cannot change it. And something older than you will decide its fate. That is not mythology. That is resignation. But there is another way to read the story, one that ancient people understood instinctively. The gods are not outside. They are patterns of reality. The sky moves in cycles, societies rise and fall, order emerges, collapses, and reforms. The Anunnaki personified these cycles. Nibiru marked transition points, nothing more, nothing less. When modern readers literalize this, they miss the wisdom entirely. Here is the irony. By insisting the Anunnaki were physical beings, we strip them of their true power. As symbols, they explain humanity's relationship with authority, fear, time, and responsibility. As aliens, they explain nothing. They become just another distraction. So why does the story persist? Because humanity is once again at a crossing point. Technology reshapes life faster than ethics can follow. Power concentrates in ways that feel uncontrollable. The future feels uncertain. Nibiru, the crossing, returns, not as a planet, as a moment, a transition, a decision point, and this leads us to the final realization of this part. The Anunnaki are not returning, they never left, because they were never external to begin with. They live wherever humans surrender agency to unseen forces. They live wherever responsibility is pushed upward instead of inward. They live wherever fear demands rulers. Every civilization reaches a moment where its myths must either evolve or harden into chains. Ancient Mesopotamia reached that moment when its cities grew too large, its kings too powerful, and its rituals too rigid. The gods that once explained the world slowly became tools of control. Authority fossilized, flexibility vanished, and eventually those civilizations collapsed, not because the gods abandoned them, but because the stories they told themselves no longer served reality. We are standing at a similar moment now. The Anunnaki narrative feels modern not because it is ancient, but because it expresses a tension that has returned with force. The fear that humanity has outgrown its ability to govern itself. When systems feel too vast to comprehend, myth rushes back in. Consider how often people say the world feels out of control. Economies crash without warning. Algorithms shape behavior invisibly. Decisions made by a few ripple across billions of lives. From the inside, it feels less like democracy and more like fate. And fate has always worn the face of gods. The Anunnaki become a language for expressing this loss of control, not literally but emotionally. They stand in for the sense that humanity is no longer steering its own creation. There is a crucial distinction we must now make. Ancient people believed the gods controlled nature. Modern people fear that something controls humanity. This is not the same fear. Ancient fear was environmental. Modern fear is systemic, and because systems are abstract, invisible, and complex, the mind reaches for ancient forms to explain them. Gods, overseers, hidden rulers, the Anunnaki fit perfectly. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Nothing about modern power structures requires aliens to explain them. Hierarchy emerges naturally. Institutions self-preserve. Power concentrates where accountability weakens. This is human behavior, always has been. The Anunnaki myth absolves humanity of responsibility for these patterns, and that is precisely why it is so tempting. Now let us confront the idea of return. Why are people so obsessed with the Anunnaki coming back? Why does Nibiru always loom on the horizon? Because return implies judgment, a reckoning, an end to the current order. When people feel powerless to change the system from within, they fantasize about an external reset, a flood, an invasion, a cosmic intervention. Someone else ends it all. This desire appears again and again in history. It is the psychology of collapse, but collapses are not caused by gods. They are caused by rigidity, by refusal to adapt, by clinging to outdated narratives long after they stop serving reality. This is the real lesson hidden inside the Anunnaki story, not that powerful beings once ruled Earth, but that societies who believe power is immutable eventually destroy themselves. Ancient myths encoded this warning. When gods withdrew, chaos followed, not because gods were real, but because social order failed. When rituals lost meaning, legitimacy collapsed. When authority stopped reflecting reality, people stopped believing. The gods did not abandon humanity. Humanity outgrew its gods. Now look at our own time. Scientific knowledge has expanded beyond mythic explanation. Global systems operate faster than moral consensus. Technology amplifies human behavior, good and bad. We are once again between stories, and when people live between stories, anxiety explodes. This is when old gods return wearing new masks. The Anunnaki narrative does not thrive among people who feel empowered. It thrives among people who feel trapped. This is not an insult, it is a signal. A signal that meaning, agency, and accountability feel out of reach. And rather than address those issues directly, the mind externalizes them. Here is the critical insight. The Anunnaki myth is not dangerous because it is false. It is dangerous because it feels complete. It offers an explanation for everything. And explanations that explain everything tend to stop curiosity dead in its tracks. If aliens did it, there is nothing left to examine. If gods control it all, there is nothing left to fix. But ancient myths were never meant to be complete explanations. They were frameworks, temporary scaffolding. They evolved, they changed. They died when they no longer served. Modern reinterpretations freeze them in place. And frozen myths become prisons. Now let us ask the question directly. What would it mean if humanity accepted that there were no Anunnaki rulers, no hidden creators, no cosmic overseers, only human systems built by human hands? It would mean responsibility returns home. It would mean power can be challenged. It would mean the future is open. That is far more frightening than alien gods. This is why the Anunnaki story keeps circling back to control, because control relieves anxiety. Even oppressive control is predictable. Freedom is not, but there is another layer we have not yet addressed. The Anunnaki are often described as flawed, arguing among themselves, divided, emotional, inconsistent. This is not how extraterrestrials would behave. This is how humans behave. The gods are not superior beings. They are projections of ourselves magnified to cosmic scale. Which means something profound. The Anunnaki story is humanity studying itself, its fears, its hierarchies, its longing for order, its discomfort with freedom. Now consider this carefully. If ancient people truly encountered superior extraterrestrial beings, their myths would reflect incomprehensible perfection. But instead, we see bureaucracy, councils, disputes, favoritism, punishment. The gods rule like kings because they were modeled on kings, not the other way around. Anunnaki are not evidence of alien visitation. They are evidence of early political philosophy, encoded in myth, and now finally we arrive at the turning point of the entire story. The Anunnaki narrative can be read in two ways. One leads to fear and paralysis, the other leads to clarity. If the gods ruled, then humans are powerless. If the gods are symbols, then humans are responsible. That is the choice hidden beneath every version of the myth. Nibiru, the crossing point, is not approaching Earth. We are approaching it, a transition, a decision about how we explain power, authority, and responsibility moving forward. Do we reach backward into myth for answers, or do we confront complexity head-on? Ancient people used gods to understand forces they could not control. Modern people use conspiracies to explain systems they do not understand. Both serve the same psychological function, but understanding that function is the first step toward outgrowing it. Here is the truth the Anunnaki myth is trying to tell us without words. When humans feel disconnected from agency, they invent overseers. When humans feel overwhelmed by complexity, they simplify into narratives. When humans fear freedom, they imagine rulers. The Anunnaki are not coming back, but the conditions that create them never left. We peeled the Anunnaki away from aliens. We separated Nibiru from rogue planets. We dismantled conspiracies, symbols, and projections. And what remained was not emptiness. What remained was us, our fears, our need for order, our discomfort with uncertainty, our longing for meaning beyond ourselves. This is the part of the story where many people instinctively turn away because it offers no overseers, no hidden rulers, no cosmic architects to blame or worship, only responsibility. Ancient civilizations did not ask whether gods were real. That question would not have made sense to them. The gods were real because they worked. They explained seasons, they justified kings, they organized society, they gave suffering a reason. Reality was not measured by evidence, it was measured by coherence. The Anunnaki mattered because they held the world together. And when they stopped doing that, when the stories no longer fit reality, civilizations collapsed, not because the gods were false, but because belief alone could no longer sustain order. That is the lesson modern culture refuses to hear. We are not living in an age without gods. We are living in an age between gods. Old narratives no longer convince. New narratives have not stabilized. Science explains how but not why. Technology empowers but also alienates. Information connects but overwhelms. And in that gap, ancient figures like the Anunnaki rush back in not because they are true but because they are familiar. They offer a ready-made structure, hierarchy, authority, purpose. Even if that purpose is servitude, here is the uncomfortable reality. The Anunnaki myth is not about being ruled by gods, it is about being relieved from choosing. If someone else designed the world, then we are not responsible for its failures. If someone else controls the system, then resistance is futile. If someone else will return to reset everything, then we can wait. Waiting is easier than acting, but ancient people did not wait. They built, they adapted, they changed their gods when necessary. That is something modern audiences often forget. Mesopotamian religion evolved constantly. Gods rose and fell, attributes changed, stories were rewritten. The Anunnaki themselves were absorbed, transformed, and reinterpreted across centuries. They were not fixed truths, they were tools. Modern reinterpretations freeze them in place, and frozen myths become dangerous, because they stop being explanations and start being excuses. Now we must confront the deepest fear beneath the Anunnaki story. The fear that without overseers nothing guarantees meaning, no plan, no destiny, no cosmic justice, just cause and effect, choice and consequence, that terrifies us. Because it means suffering does not always happen for a reason. It means power must be challenged, not explained away. It means the future is not written. Ancient people feared chaos. Modern people fear freedom. That is the great inversion, and the Anunnaki sit precisely at that intersection. Let us say something clearly without metaphor. There is no ancient race watching humanity. There is no hidden planet steering our fate. There is no cosmic hierarchy ensuring justice or punishment, but there is something far more powerful: human belief. Belief shapes institutions. Belief shapes obedience. Belief shapes resistance. Every empire that ever existed was built on belief long before it was built on force. The Anunnaki myth is belief trying to return power to the heavens. But power never lived there, it lived in people. Now consider how often Anunnaki narratives focus on bloodlines, chosen families, divine descent, inherited authority. This mirrors the oldest human justifications for power. Kings claimed divine ancestry. Elites claimed sacred right. Aliens simply replaced gods in the modern version. Same structure, different costume. And now one final realization. The Anunnaki myth survives because it externalizes guilt. If humanity was engineered, then our cruelty is not our fault. If we were designed to serve, then exploitation is inevitable. If gods rule, then injustice is cosmic. This is deeply comforting and deeply dangerous, because the opposite is true. Cruelty is a choice. Exploitation is a system humans maintain. Injustice persists because people tolerate it. No aliens required. Ancient myths taught people how to live. Modern conspiracies teach people how to surrender. That is the difference. Now let us return one last time to Nibiru. Nibiru means crossing, transition, threshold. It was never a planet coming to Earth. It was Earth coming to a decision. Ancient people knew this. Every crossing demanded change, ritual, reordering, renewal. When societies failed to change, collapse followed. Not because gods punished them, but because reality does not negotiate with denial. We are standing at such a crossing now. And this is where the Anunnaki story becomes urgent, not as mythology, but as warning. When people believe power is unreachable, they stop engaging. When people believe systems are eternal, they stop imagining alternatives. When people believe overseers rule, they stop taking responsibility. Civilizations do not fall from invasion, they fall from resignation. The Anunnaki never returned to judge humanity. Humanity judged itself through its actions, its structures, its choices. That was always the real story. Now ask yourself this honestly. What is more frightening, that ancient gods ruled us or that no one ever did, that there is no hidden intelligence guiding history, only human decisions repeated at scale? Ancient people accepted this more easily than we do. They believed gods reflected order, but they also believed humans upheld it through action. Modern interpretations remove that balance. They turn myth into destiny. This is why the Anunnaki narrative feels heavy, because it quietly tells you that nothing you do matters, that the script was written long ago, that the ending is fixed. That belief is the real poison. The Anunnaki do not enslave humanity. Humanity enslaves itself when it mistakes myth for fate. And now we arrive at the moment where the story stops being told and starts being handed back to you. The Anunnaki were never extraterrestrial rulers. They were humanity's first attempt to understand power. Nibiru was never a planet. It was a moment of change. The gods never left. They transformed into systems, ideologies, and narratives. And now once again they ask the same question they always have. Will humans take responsibility for their world, or will they invent overseers to avoid it? At the very beginning of this journey, we asked a simple question. did the Anunnaki come from a planet called Nibiru? But as you have seen, that question was never really about astronomy. It was about authority. It was about control. It was about meaning. And now, at this point in the story, we must ask the question that hides behind all the others. What happens when humanity realizes there are no overseers? This realization is not empowering at first. It is destabilizing. Because for most of history, humans have organized their world around something above them: gods, fate, destiny, divine order. Even when those forces were terrifying, they provided structure. They told people who they were, what they were allowed to do, where responsibility ended. Without them, everything becomes uncertain. Freedom is not comforting. Freedom is demanding. This is why ancient myths were so powerful. They absorbed uncertainty. They turned randomness into intention. They made suffering understandable, even if it was cruel. The Anunnaki were not benevolent gods. They were explanatory gods. An explanation is one of the deepest human needs. Modern society has explanations for almost everything. Science explains mechanisms, economics explains incentives, psychology explains behavior, and yet something remains unresolved: purpose. Science tells us how stars form, but not why existence matters. Technology gives us power, but not wisdom. Information gives us access, but not direction. So once again, myth returns, not because science failed, but because meaning cannot be engineered. The Anunnaki narrative steps into this gap. It offers a universe with intention, creators, designers, architects. Even if they are cruel, at least they are there. That is the temptation, but let us speak plainly now. The Anunnaki story in its modern form is not a theory. It is a coping mechanism, a way to deal with a world that feels overwhelming, impersonal, and uncontrollable. This does not make believers foolish. It makes them human. The danger lies not in belief itself, but in what belief does. When people believe power comes from beyond humanity, they stop demanding accountability from humans. When people believe systems are ancient and immutable, they stop imagining change. When people believe suffering is designed, they stop asking how to reduce it. This is how myths quietly become cages. Ancient people escaped this trap more often than we think. They rewrote their gods, they adapted rituals, they shifted values. Myth was flexible. Modern reinterpretations freeze myth into hidden truth, and hidden truths cannot be questioned. This is why modern Anunnaki narratives are often hostile to skepticism. Because skepticism threatens not facts but comfort. It threatens the idea that someone else is in control, and that is the hardest idea of all to surrender. Now let us confront the final illusion. The illusion that humanity is too small, too flawed, too divided to govern itself. This belief is everywhere. It hides behind phrases like, "People can't handle the truth," "We need strong rulers," "Someone has to be in charge." Ancient gods expressed this belief openly. Modern systems express it silently. The Anunnaki myth is simply the ancient version resurfacing under modern conditions. But here is the truth no myth will ever tell you. Humanity has always governed itself. Every law was written by humans. Every hierarchy constructed by humans. Every system maintained by human participation. Even the most oppressive regimes require compliance. Power is never purely external. It is relational, and that means it can be altered. The Anunnaki story becomes unnecessary the moment this is understood, not because it is disproven, but because it is outgrown, just as ancient people outgrew earlier gods. Now let us return to Nibiru one final time. Nibiru was never an object, it was a moment, a crossing between states of being. Between chaos and order, between old stories and new ones, between dependence and responsibility. We are standing at such a crossing now. This is why the Anunnaki myth feels urgent. It is not warning us of invasion, it is warning us of stagnation, of what happens when humanity refuses to update its understanding of power, when it clings to narratives that excuse helplessness. Think about how often people say, the system is broken. They control everything. It's always been this way. These are modern prayers, not to gods, but to inevitability. And inevitability is the modern equivalent of fate. Ancient myths taught people how to live within fate. Modern myths teach people how to surrender to it. That is the shift, but there is another path, one that ancient people glimpsed even if they could not fully articulate it. The realization that gods were reflections, not rulers, reflections of fear, reflections of desire, reflections of social order. When that realization dawned, new philosophies emerged. Ethics replaced ritual, law replaced divine decree. Responsibility shifted downward, slowly, painfully, imperfectly, but it happened. We are in the middle of that process again. Technology has outpaced myth. Systems have outgrown justification. Power no longer wears crowns or halos, it wears infrastructure, and infrastructure demands understanding, not worship. The Anunnaki myth becomes dangerous when it is used to mystify what should be examined, when it replaces analysis with awe, when it replaces responsibility with resignation. But when it is read correctly as symbolism, it becomes valuable again because it shows us exactly what we fear. And fear is information. We fear being alone in the universe. We fear being responsible for suffering. We fear freedom more than domination. The Anunnaki myth encodes all of this, not as prophecy. As confession, now let us speak directly to the listener. If the Anunnaki never existed as physical beings, if Nibiru was never a planet, if there are no overseers coming to judge or reset humanity, then the future rests exactly where it always has. In human hands. That is not comforting, that is terrifying, and that is why so many people look away. But here is the paradox. The same realization that terrifies also liberates, because if no one is in control, then control is negotiable, then systems can change, then meaning can be created, then responsibility is shared. The Anunnaki myth promises certainty, but certainty is static. Humanity does not evolve through certainty, it evolves through questioning. Ancient people questioned through myth, we question through inquiry. Different tools, same goal, understanding how to live. From the very beginning of civilization, humans have lived between two opposing forces. On one side, uncertainty. On the other, meaning. Uncertainty is vast, silent, and indifferent. Meaning is constructed, fragile, and deeply human. Myths were never meant to erase uncertainty. They were meant to hold it so humans could survive. The Anunnaki were one such container. They held fear, they held authority. They held the terror of living in a world where floods could erase everything overnight. They were not lies, they were solutions, temporary ones. The problem arises when temporary solutions are mistaken for permanent truth. Ancient people understood this intuitively. Modern people struggle with it deeply, because we are taught to believe that truth must be fixed, absolute, final. Myths were never that, they were adaptive. Now let us return to the question of origins, not of gods, but of belief. Why do humans create overseers? Because responsibility is heavy, because freedom is exhausting, because uncertainty never stops asking questions. And because meaning does not arrive on its own, it must be made. The Anunnaki myth tells us something honest about ourselves. When humans feel small, they imagine something bigger. When humans feel powerless, they imagine rulers. When humans feel lost, they imagine designers. This is not stupidity. This is survival, but survival is not the same as growth. What helped humanity endure its early history can become a limitation later on. A child needs parents. An adult must become one. Civilizations are no different. The Anunnaki narrative represents childhood on a civilizational scale, a time when authority had to come from above because coordination required it. but humanity is no longer a small tribe staring at the sky in fear. We are a global species shaping the planet itself, and that changes everything. Here is the truth that sits at the core of all Anunnaki speculation. If advanced beings truly existed and ruled humanity, their presence would not be ambiguous. Power does not hide itself indefinitely. It leaves systems, it leaves infrastructure, it leaves unmistakable patterns. Instead, what we find are stories, symbols, psychological echoes, and those echoes grow louder in times of stress, economic instability, environmental collapse, technological acceleration, cultural fragmentation. These conditions create fertile ground for overseer myths, not because aliens arrive, but because fear does. The Anunnaki did not return in the modern era. The conditions that create them did. That distinction matters. Now let us speak about responsibility, not in abstract terms, but concretely. Responsibility means accepting that systems are built by humans, that injustice is maintained by participation, that change requires effort, conflict, and discomfort. It means no reset button, no divine intervention, no cosmic excuse, just cause and effect. This is why myths of return are so seductive. They promise resolution without effort, judgment without accountability, endings without growth, but reality does not work that way. Ancient myths knew this, even if we forget. The gods did not fix everything. They demanded rituals, sacrifices, obedience. They required participation. Modern interpretations remove participation. They replace it with waiting, waiting for disclosure, waiting for invasion, waiting for judgment, waiting for rescue. Waiting is the one thing that guarantees nothing changes. Now consider this. If the Anunnaki truly created humanity as servants, and if they truly ruled from beyond the stars, then the most revolutionary act would be obedience. But if the Anunnaki are symbols, then the most revolutionary act is understanding. Understanding breaks spells. Understanding dissolves fear. Understanding returns agency. This is why ancient myths were taught alongside wisdom. They were not isolated narratives, they were part of education. Modern consumption strips myth of context and turns it into entertainment or paranoia. The wisdom is lost, only the imagery remains. Let us restore that wisdom now. The Anunnaki represent the forces humans once believed they could not challenge: nature, authority, time, death. By naming them, humans made them negotiable. Ritual was negotiation, law was negotiation, culture was negotiation. That was the point. Modern Anunnaki narratives reverse this process. They turn negotiable forces into untouchable ones. They declare power absolute. That is regression, not revelation. Now ask yourself this. What kind of species believes it cannot govern itself? One that is afraid of itself, afraid of its capacity for harm, afraid of its capacity for responsibility. The Anunnaki myth is not fear of aliens, it is fear of humanity. But fear is not destiny, it is information, and information can be used. Here is what the Anunnaki story is really asking of us without words. Can we build meaning without overseers? Can we confront injustice without blaming cosmic forces? Can we accept uncertainty without inventing rulers? Can we grow up as a species? Ancient people asked these questions through gods. We ask them through philosophy, science, and ethics. Different languages, same struggle. The universe does not care whether the Anunnaki existed, but humanity does. Because how we answer this story shapes how we live. If we believe we are designed to serve, we will tolerate exploitation. If we believe power is cosmic, we will avoid accountability. If we believe fate is fixed, we will stop imagining alternatives. But if we understand myths as mirrors, then we gain something extraordinary: the ability to change the reflection. The Anunnaki do not disappear when we understand them. They transform. They become lessons instead of masters, symbols instead of rulers. Questions instead of answers, and now we approach the true end of this journey. Not an ending with certainty, but an ending with clarity. The Anunnaki did not come from a planet called Nibiru. Nibiru was a crossing, not a world. The gods did not create humanity as servants. Humans created gods to explain service. There are no overseers waiting to return. There are only humans deciding what comes next. That realization is not comforting, but it is honest. And honesty is the foundation of every civilization that lasts. For thousands of years, humanity has searched the sky not just for answers, but for permission. Permission to explain suffering, permission to justify power, permission to believe that someone somewhere knows what they are doing. The Anunnaki were never just gods, they were permission made visible. If gods ruled, then order had meaning. If gods commanded, then obedience was sacred. If gods designed humanity, then purpose was assigned. That framework held civilization together when uncertainty was unbearable. But frameworks are not meant to last forever. They are scaffolding, and scaffolding must eventually be removed or the structure can never grow. What happens when scaffolding is mistaken for the building itself? It becomes a cage. That is the moment humanity has reached now. The Anunnaki myth has become heavy not because it is false, but because it is no longer necessary, and yet we keep clinging to it. Why? Because necessity has been replaced by fear. Fear of chaos, fear of responsibility, fear of a universe that does not care. In ancient times, fear came from nature. In modern times, fear comes from ourselves. Our technologies exceed our ethics. Our systems outpace our compassion. Our power grows faster than our wisdom. And so instead of asking how to mature into this power, we imagine that it was never ours to begin with. Aliens made us. Gods rule us. The system is eternal. This is not ancient thinking, this is avoidance. The Anunnaki narrative is not dangerous because it is strange. It is dangerous because it feels finished. It tells you that the story has already been written, that the hierarchy is ancient, that resistance is pointless. That awakening is simply realizing you are powerless. That is not awakening, that is surrender. Ancient myths never demanded surrender, they demanded participation. Ritual was action, law was action, culture was action. Even gods required maintenance. Modern reinterpretations erase that responsibility. They turn humanity into spectators of its own fate. Let us speak clearly now without poetry. There is no evidence, none, that humanity was engineered by extraterrestrial beings. There is no evidence that ancient gods were physical visitors. There is no evidence of a planet called Nibiru entering the inner solar system. These claims persist not because they are supported, but because they solve an emotional problem. They make power external. They make injustice cosmic. They make meaning inherited instead of created. Now consider this carefully. If the Anunnaki created humanity, then humanity is not accountable. If the Anunnaki rule from the shadows, then human institutions are just puppets. If the Anunnaki will return to judge or reset the world, then patience replaces action. Every version of the myth leads to the same psychological outcome: inaction. But history shows us something very different. Nothing meaningful has ever changed because humans waited. Every shift came from confrontation. Every reform came from discomfort. Every expansion of freedom came from people who refused to believe that power was unreachable. No gods intervened. No aliens descended. People acted. The Anunnaki myth tries to erase that truth, not intentionally, but effectively. Now let us return to the beginning, truly the beginning, before writing, before cities. Before gods, early humans lived in small groups where power was immediate and visible. If someone hoarded resources, the group responded. If someone threatened survival, they were confronted. There were no invisible rulers. As societies grew, power became abstract, kings replaced faces, laws replaced voices, gods replaced explanations. The Anunnaki appear exactly at this moment in history. They are not cosmic anomalies, they are political abstractions. This is why they feel so relevant today. Because power has become abstract again, algorithms decide visibility, markets decide survival, systems decide outcomes. And when power becomes abstract, the mind reaches for gods. Even technological societies do this, especially technological societies. But here is the difference now. We know how myths work, we understand symbolism, we understand psychology, we understand how narratives shape behavior, which means we no longer have the excuse of ignorance. If we cling to overseer myths now, it is a choice, and that choice matters because stories shape futures. Let us confront the hardest idea in this entire journey. Meaning is not discovered, it is constructed. There is no cosmic script, no hidden instruction manual, no ancient intelligence waiting to guide us. The universe is not a story, it is a condition. And meaning arises only when conscious beings decide what matters. This terrifies people. Because it means there is no final authority to appeal to, no ultimate judge to correct injustice after the fact, no guarantee that suffering will be balanced, no assurance that it will all make sense in the end. That is the cost of maturity. Ancient myths soften this cost. Modern conspiracies postpone it, but postponement only deepens the reckoning. Now think about this. If humanity truly believed the Anunnaki ruled everything, then rebellion would be impossible. But people still rebel. They still resist. They still imagine better worlds. That instinct betrays the myth. Because at the deepest level, humans do not actually believe they are powerless. They feel it, but they do not accept it, and that tension creates stories. The Anunnaki myth exists at the border between feeling powerless and refusing to be. It is a compromise, a way to name the fear without confronting its implications, but the implications are unavoidable now. Climate change does not care about gods. Nuclear weapons do not care about myth. Artificial intelligence does not care about ancient stories. These are human-made forces that require human decisions. There will be no divine intervention, no alien correction, only consequences. This is where the Anunnaki story finally reveals its purpose. It is not telling us about the past. It is warning us about the present. It says, be careful what you believe controls you, because you will act accordingly. If you believe you were designed to serve, you will accept servitude. If you believe power is ancient and immutable, you will not challenge it. If you believe fate is written, you will stop writing. Ancient people believed gods ruled, but they also believed humans upheld order. Modern reinterpretations remove that balance. They keep the ruler, they erase the responsibility. That is the distortion. Now let us speak directly, without metaphor or mythology. The Anunnaki are not coming back. No disclosure is coming, no planet is approaching, no reset is scheduled. The future will not be decided by beings older than humanity. It will be decided by humans who act or do not. This realization is not hopeful. Hope implies rescue. This is sobering, and sobriety is exactly what civilizations require to survive transition. The Anunnaki myth, when read correctly, is not a lie. It is a lesson humanity once needed, but lessons must be learned. If they are repeated forever, they stop being wisdom. They become stagnation. Now we must ask the final question, not as speculation, but as responsibility. What happens after the gods? What happens after we stop imagining overseers? What happens when meaning is no longer given but chosen? The answer is not chaos, it is ethics, not imposed, constructed, debated, revised, owned. Humanity does not need gods or aliens to mature, it needs courage. Courage to face uncertainty without mythology. courage to accept responsibility without destiny, courage to act without permission. The Anunnaki story ends not with a revelation about ancient beings, but with a revelation about us. We invented gods to survive. Now we must learn to survive without inventing rulers. This is the true crossing. This is the real Nibiru, not a planet, a moment, a transition between dependence and agency, between myth and meaning, between childhood and adulthood as a species. Because after everything that has been said, everything that has been stripped away, one truth remains unavoidable. The Anunnaki story survives because humanity is standing at a threshold it has never crossed before, not technologically, not scientifically, but psychologically. For the first time in history, human beings possess the power to permanently alter the conditions of life on this planet, not symbolically, not mythically, but physically. Climate systems, genetic structures, information ecosystems, weapons capable of erasing civilization. This level of power was once attributed only to gods, and now it rests in human hands. That is not a metaphor. That is the reality that makes ancient overseer myths return with such force. Because power without precedent demands responsibility without precedent. And responsibility on that scale is terrifying, so the mind looks for relief. It looks for older intelligences, older authorities, older hierarchies. It looks for the Anunnaki. This is the unspoken reason modern people resurrect ancient gods as aliens. Aliens feel more acceptable than gods. Gods feel outdated. Aliens feel modern, technological, rational, advanced, but the function is identical. They reintroduce hierarchy. They restore the idea that someone else is in charge. Let us say something that cuts straight through the fog. If an advanced extraterrestrial civilization truly existed and influenced humanity, their presence would not be ambiguous. It would not be hidden in metaphors. It would not be scattered across misunderstood tablets. It would not require reinterpretation by modern authors. Power announces itself, always. History shows us this again and again. Empires do not whisper, they dominate. What we find instead are myths that evolve alongside human needs. When humans feared nature, gods ruled storms. When humans feared kings, gods legitimized crowns. When humans fear systems, gods become aliens, different masks, same fear. Now consider this carefully. The Anunnaki are often described as cold, calculating, superior, indifferent to human suffering. That description matches something very familiar. Not aliens, systems, bureaucracy, markets, institutions, algorithms. These are the true forces that feel inhuman today. And instead of confronting them directly, the mind externalizes them into cosmic beings. It feels easier to imagine gods than to dismantle systems. The Anunnaki myth allows people to say, "This is not our fault. This was always meant to be. This power is ancient and untouchable." Those statements are emotionally soothing. They are also paralyzing. Ancient myths were not paralyzing. They were participatory. People believed they could influence the gods through ritual, through law, through obedience or rebellion. Modern Anunnaki narratives remove that agency. They portray humans as livestock, experiments, or prisoners. That is not ancient worldview. That is modern despair projected backward. Now let us address the question many are afraid to ask. Why does the idea of being created to serve resonate so deeply? Because many people already feel that way. They feel trapped in systems they did not design, working lives they did not choose, rules they cannot influence. The Anunnaki myth does not create this feeling. It gives it a story, but stories can heal or harm. And this one, when taken literally, harms because it replaces analysis with awe. It replaces resistance with resignation. It replaces responsibility with destiny. Now let us talk about destiny. Ancient cultures believed destiny was flexible. Even gods could be challenged. Even fate could be negotiated. That nuance is lost in modern retellings. Destiny becomes fixed. The return is inevitable. Judgment is unavoidable. Nothing can be done. This is not ancient belief. This is modern hopelessness, and hopelessness is contagious. It spreads faster than evidence, faster than reason, faster than truth. Now let us step back and observe the pattern. When societies feel capable, myths fade. When societies feel overwhelmed, myths return. The resurgence of Anunnaki narratives is not random. It is a symptom, a signal that people feel disconnected from power. But disconnection does not mean power is gone. It means it has become abstract, and abstract power must be understood, not mythologized. This is where the Anunnaki story must be handled carefully, because if it is treated as literal truth, it becomes an excuse. But if it is treated as symbolism, it becomes a warning. The warning is this: when humans believe they are ruled by forces beyond challenge, civilizations stagnate. When humans believe they are responsible for their world, civilizations adapt. That is the choice encoded in every version of this myth. Now let us confront the most difficult idea of all. There is no final narrative, no ultimate explanation, no story that resolves everything. The universe does not owe us coherence. Meaning is not guaranteed. This is the reality ancient myths protected us from, and now that protection is fading. This does not mean life is meaningless. It means meaning is fragile. And fragility demands care. The Anunnaki myth offers indestructible meaning. Ancient, cosmic, unchanging, that is appealing, but it is also lifeless, because anything unchanging cannot grow. Human meaning grows, it adapts, it breaks and reforms. That is its strength. Now let us speak plainly about the future. There will be no disclosure event that explains everything. There will be no ancient beings returning to reset the world. There will be no hidden planet bringing judgment. There will be choices made by people with consequences. This is not a pessimistic conclusion. It is a realistic one, and realism is the foundation of wisdom. The Anunnaki story, when stripped of spectacle, leaves us with a single responsibility: to stop asking who controls humanity and start asking how humanity chooses to govern itself. That question is harder than any conspiracy, because it requires effort, dialogue, conflict, compromise, and courage. Ancient myths offered answers. Modern humanity must offer solutions. That is the difference between childhood and maturity. We are closer now to the end of this journey, not because we have exhausted the story, but because we have arrived at its purpose. The Anunnaki are not something to believe in or debunk. They are something to understand. They are the echo of humanity's struggle with power, fear, and responsibility. And that struggle is not ancient. It is ongoing. And this is where we finally end the journey. Not with a revelation from the sky, not with a hidden planet emerging from the darkness, not with ancient beings returning to judge humanity, but with something far more difficult to accept: silence. Because when all the noise fades, when the theories collapse, when the myths are stripped of spectacle, when the fear loses its symbols, what remains is not mystery. What remains is choice. And choice is the one thing no god, no alien, no Anunnaki ever wanted humanity to fully claim. From the first moment humans looked up at the stars, they felt two things at once: wonder and fear. Wonder at the vastness, fear of insignificance. And so, across cultures and millennia, humans did the same thing again and again. They filled the sky with beings, not because the sky demanded it, but because the human mind did. The Anunnaki were never visitors from Nibiru. They were visitors from within. Born from the moment humanity realized the world was bigger than it could control. Born from the fear that power must come from somewhere else. Born from the need to explain why life feels ordered and why suffering feels intentional. Ancient people did not invent gods because they were naive. They invented gods because they were honest about their fear. They knew they were vulnerable. They knew nature could destroy them. They knew power could crush them, so they gave those forces faces, names, stories, and in doing so they made the world survivable. But myths are not meant to be permanent. They are bridges. They help humanity cross from ignorance to understanding, and once crossed they must be released. Holding onto them too long turns bridges into walls. The tragedy of the modern Anunnaki narrative is not that it is wrong, it is that it is late. Late for a species that now alters climate, late for a species that reshapes life itself, late for a species that has outgrown the comfort of overseers. We no longer fear storms the way ancient people did. We no longer fear eclipses. We no longer fear the sky, but we do fear ourselves, our capacity to destroy, our inability to agree, our systems that grow beyond our control. And so the old gods return reborn as aliens, not because they are real, but because fear is. The Anunnaki myth is humanity asking a question it has always asked in different forms. Is someone in charge? And the most unsettling answer possible is no, not gods, not aliens, not fate, only us. This answer terrifies people. Because it means injustice is not cosmic, it is human-made. It means suffering is not designed, it is tolerated. It means power is not ancient, it is constructed, and anything constructed can be dismantled. The Anunnaki story promises certainty, but certainty is static, life is not. Humanity has never evolved by clinging to certainty. It evolves by confronting uncertainty honestly. When ancient people believed the gods ruled, they still acted. They built cities, they made laws. They resisted tyrants, they adapted their beliefs when reality demanded it. They did not wait, they did not surrender, they participated. Modern interpretations forget this. They turn gods into jailers, they turn myths into destinies, they turn symbols into shackles, and that is where the story breaks. There is no return of the Anunnaki coming, no judgment day written in the stars, no hidden planet waiting to reset the world. The only return that ever happens is the return of the same question again and again in every era. Will humans take responsibility for the world they are shaping, or will they invent overseers to avoid it? That is the real meaning of Nibiru, not a planet, a crossing, a threshold between dependence and agency, between myth and maturity, between waiting and acting. Ancient people stood at this crossing before, so will future generations. The names change, the symbols change, the question never does. The Anunnaki did not rule humanity. Humanity used the idea of gods to understand power. Now humanity must understand power without gods. That is the task of our time, and here is the final truth. If the universe is silent, if meaning is not given, if no one is watching, then what we do matters more, not less, because there is no cosmic correction coming, only consequences. This is not a bleak conclusion, it is an honest one. And honesty is the foundation of every civilization that survives its own power. The Anunnaki were never meant to be believed in forever. They were meant to be understood and then outgrown, just like every god before them. And so this story ends where it always should have ended, not with fear, not with awe, but with responsibility. Now, before you go, if you've made it this far, take a moment. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next deep dive into ancient mysteries and human history. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from, what country, what city, what corner of the world brought you here, and let us know your thoughts. Do you see the Anunnaki differently now? Because this conversation doesn't end here, it continues with you.